and then we'll get moving. Tonight is just one long video, possibly too long for this time of night, but I'll also share the link to it in the chat here, so that if it gets too late for you, Frederick, Raphael, Kevin, you've got the link so you can watch it later. And of course, tomorrow we end this second run of 5 sessions, and we'll share the links with you all. Essie records who attends, so we know who has attended. So we'll pay special attention to you because you've made the effort. We will send it out generally to all candidates. And just to let you know, there are 1 or 2 candidates pretty much every week who are sitting IELTS around 50% pass rate, which is, from ILR's point of view, is pretty good. But from your point of view, because you're the ones who are paying for the test, important that we get that higher. So yeah, don't rush into your test. If we know you're B1 or even almost B2 and you're putting in the effort, then we do record that, and we offer candidates to clients. It's those of you who have either done the test or are making the effort, or are close to get offered to clients. So I'll shut up and we will start. And thanks all.
You've just found the ultimate guide to IELTS speaking. This is the longest, most detailed guide to IELTS speaking you'll find anywhere on the internet. It's going to help you understand things about the format of the test, how you can improve your speaking at home for free, and give you the same strategies thousands of my students have used to get a band 9 on the speaking test. Not only that, we're also going to give you the same grammar and vocabulary that we've only ever shared with our band 9 VIP students before. And then at the end of the video, we're going to do something very, very special. We're going to share a mock test that we've never shared before. It's from a student who you might have seen before, where she got a band 8. We've showed her lots of the things included in this video, and then we invited her back to our studio to see if she could improve from a band 8 to a band 9. But let's start by helping you understand the 3 different parts of the speaking test and share with you those strategies that our band 9 students have used to succeed. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So let's start off by going through the 3 different parts of the IELTS speaking test, and also tell you the characteristics of a band 5 to 6.5 student versus a band 7, 8 or 9 student. The vast majority of the candidates that the examiner will see will be in and around these scores. These are the average scores, and vast majority of examiners are seeing things like this. And these students do very particular things that are very easy for the examiners to spot. They are very, very different from band 7, 8 and 9 students. So what we're going to do is first of all go through each part and tell you what these things are that these students do, and then show you one of our students, and you can decide whether they are doing these things here or these things. So part 1, normally the easiest part, but it is where a lot of students mess up and they do a few things that are very avoidable. The most common thing that examiners hear and see is a memorized answer. The reason why they hear so many memorized answers is in part 1, because these are quite predictable questions like tell me about your job, your studies, where you live, where you're from. A lot of students will memorize answers in the hope to impress the examiner. But it's very, very easy to spot these, and it actually lowers your score. Related to that are very long answers, and these two are related. So often students will go online, they'll go onto YouTube, they'll go onto websites that have these kind of template answers, and often those are just way, way too long. You don't have to give very long answers to a question like, do you work or do you study, or tell me about where you live. Imagine you are in a normal situation. Imagine you are meeting someone for the first time and they say, where are you from? You wouldn't talk for 20 minutes. Also, sometimes these are off topic. So again, these three are kind of related because the examiner will ask you quite predictable questions in part one. But then if they think that you have memorized answers, what they'll do is they're a bit sneaky. They will throw in very unusual questions like, how often do you wear hats? Do you like hats? When was the last time you had a birthday cake? These are all questions that you're not expecting, and it's really to catch out people who are just relying on memorized answers. And that is a really big sign to the examiner that you don't know what you're doing and you've just memorized a bunch of stuff. The other thing that is quite surprising for many people is that they sound very formal. Or another way to say this would be they sound robotic. They sound like you're talking to a robot. Now, this could be because of stress, this could be because of nerves, but it also could be that you have just been taught the wrong way. Often teachers with very little experience and students who don't know the test very well think this is a big, important test. This is a very formal occasion. I should speak like this. Hello, my name is Chris. You do not need to do that. And I'm going to show you some answers from my students. And I want you to think about, do they do any of these things or do they do other things? And then we'll talk about the main characteristics of a band 7, 8 or 9 student. To thank you for watching this video, I want to give you a free course that has helped thousands of students improve their IELTS speaking score. What it's going to do is take you through every single part of the test and give you strategies for part 1, part 2 and part 3, and also allow you to practice at home for free and get feedback. To sign up for that for free, all you have to do is just click the link in the description. Thanks very much, and let's get back to the video. Do you ever miss being in high school?
I do actually, because I started working very early. I did not get to experience the university or college. So the memories that I have or the friends I have is from high school. And I do think about times where we could just go back and have a reunion and like have that moment again.
Do you have any animals in your home as pets?
Yes, I have 2 dogs. They're both from the shelter, the animal shelter. They're rescues. Yeah, I've always had pets. Our family really likes keeping animals around.
So you can probably hear there that it didn't sound very memorized. It wasn't very long. They stayed on topic and it sounded like a normal conversation. Especially band 9 students, it doesn't seem like you're talking to an IELTS candidate. It feels like you're talking to a friend or talking to a colleague. They will also always answer the question directly. So if you ask them, do you like hats? It'll be, yes, I like hats. If you ask them, what's your favorite flavor of birthday cake? They will say vanilla or chocolate. Even though they might have never thought about that before, they will still have enough English and enough ability to answer any question. Now let's talk about seasons of the year. What's your favorite season of the year?
Well, I love any time when the sun starts to come out. So around spring or early summer before it gets too hot. You know, I just love a little bit of vitamin D and it makes me happier as well. So that is definitely better than the winter.
What do you do when it gets too hot in the summer?
Hide. I tend to also, go into any kind of buildings with air conditioning, and I have the fan every night when it's really hot. So yeah, when it gets really hot in the summer, I really need a lot of like fans and, kind of just anything I can hold with me when I go out as well.
Now, none of those answers were very long, but they did develop their answers. So there's enough development. Normally what they do is they will directly answer the question, and then they might add in some explanation, an example, maybe a little story, maybe a little bit of extra detail. Again, there's no set number of sentences. You shouldn't go into the exam thinking I must use 2 sentences or 3 sentences, or I must not go over 3 or 4 sentences, because that's just too much thinking. We want to remove as much thinking as possible and just allow you to answer questions naturally. A good little tip is, if you are confused about this, imagine you're starting a new job and you're meeting your colleagues for the first time, and they say to you, where do you live? You probably wouldn't just say London, because that's a little bit rude, to be honest. It doesn't really give people a lot to go on. You might say, oh, I've just moved to London. I've actually just moved to an area called Wandsworth. It's really nice. It's close to the river. So you can see there that I didn't really think about how many sentences to use there, or whether I should use an example or whether an explanation. I just thought, how do I sound like a normal human being? Okay, so let's move on to part 2 of the speaking test. Part 2, you will get a cue card like this one, and you will have 1 minute to prepare your answer. And then you will be asked to speak for up to 2 minutes. And this is slightly different from part 1 and part 3, because this is a monologue. The examiner isn't asking you questions. The examiner isn't interacting with you. The examiner is just sitting back and listening to you. And it's a really important part for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's very unusual to speak for up to 2 minutes in a foreign language. Often this is the first time anyone has ever done this, so it can be quite daunting. And the second reason is more important. It's the reason I think they put this part in here is because it gives the examiner a real chance to just focus on what you're saying. Focus on your fluency, your pronunciation, are you answering the question, your grammar, your vocabulary. So it's really important that you do well and you avoid these things that average students do. So the first one might be quite surprising. They rigidly stick to bullet points. So it's important that you understand the bullet points there are there to help you. They're not there to hinder you. So what average students normally do is they will just read bullet point number 1, then, oh, what do I say about bullet point number 2? I'll get to bullet point number 3. I don't know what to say. Let's go on to bullet point number 4. And then before they know it, they have run out of things to say, and they're only 30 seconds in, which is going to lower your score. You must speak until the examiner stops you in and around the 2-minute mark. Band 7, 8, and 9 students do something very, very different, which we'll talk about in a second. We've already mentioned this. They often run out of ideas. This is because they're just sticking to bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't really give them enough to go on, and they just stop talking. And I often hear students trying to make things way too complicated by using some kind of trick or template that they've memorized. For example, a very popular one is PPF, past, present, future. The intention is to make things easier for you, but it can end up making things more complicated because it's a very unnatural way to answer any question. When have you ever been in a coffee shop and someone has asked you a question and you think, I'm going to talk about the past, and then I'm going to talk about the present, and then maybe compare the present with the past, and then talk about the future? You're just doing way too much thinking, and often students will get questions that they don't know what they're going to do in the future, or the past is just not applicable at all. So this can make things worse. And band 7, 8, and 9 students don't use this at all. What do? Let's listen to one and think about what they do differently.
The first time I met a new friend, so I'm going to go way back. It was my first year of school, kindergarten. And I met a girl named Amanpreet Kaur. We were about, I think we just turned 4 years old. We met obviously in kindergarten, first year of school. What I liked about her when I first saw her, we were sitting together where the teacher made us sit next to each other. And she had this long hair, and it was like sectioned into 2 parts, and it was just braided all the way down. And she had the cutest face I've ever seen. She had this little fluffy marshmallow-like face. I guess that's all it takes when you're a kid to want to be friends with somebody. And then I tried to, so there's like this little thing that kids do where they put their thumb out to show other kids that I want to be your friend. And then if you don't want to be friends with them, you do this. It's like it's a silly little thing. So I did this to her. I put my thumb out to say, hey, do you want to be friends? And she was like, this. And I was heartbroken. I was like, how can she not want to be my friend? And then I saw her again the next day, and the next day after that, and the day after that. And then eventually we ended up becoming best friends. She did it back to me, obviously, at some point. She was my first best friend that I ever had in life. She was from Punjab, which is a part of India. And her mom used to make the most amazing, it's called paratha. It's like this stuffed bread. It's like they put potato and spices into into a flatbread. And my mom used to make something called sira, which is sweet semolina situation. Okay.
That's the end of the 2 minutes.
Okay.
So again, this was very natural. The student just was able to speak naturally, the conversation flowed, and they were able to speak quite fluently and easily for up to 2 minutes. How did they do that? Well, the first thing that they did was they just focused on the main topic. Again, if we look at the cue card, you will have the bullet points here, but at the top, this is the main topic. By just focusing on the main topic, this gives you a lot more freedom to speak fluently and naturally rather than trying to do bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, it sounds like a natural conversation. Because again, they're not using any tricks, any memorized structures or anything like that. It is again like talking to someone in a coffee shop saying, let's talk about this, or what do you think about this? Now you might be thinking, well, should we not use the bullet points? Well, they do use the bullet points, but they only use them when it's appropriate to help them. So they use the bullet points to help them speak naturally. So what does that mean? Well, if they see bullet point number 1 and they think, I can easily talk about that, they talk about that. But if they look at bullet point number 2 and think, I don't really know about that, I don't feel comfortable talking about that, don't talk about that. And then they can talk maybe about bullet point number 3 and bullet point number 4, but they can add other things below the bullet points, other things related to that main topic. All they're doing is just picking things that make it easy for them to speak like a human being naturally to the examiner. Now let's move on to part 3. Part 3, in my opinion, is the most challenging part because it requires the student to do a few special things that most students are not used to doing. So let's look at part 3 for these band 5, 6.5 students. So the biggest difference between part 1 and part 3 is part 1 is just, as I've said, every day getting to know you, chit chat, small talk type questions. Part 3 are more academic style questions, though it doesn't matter if you're doing academic or general training. The reason why I say they're more academic style questions is they're asking you about more abstract topics. So in part 1, they might say something like, do you use public transport? That is a question about you. It's impossible to get it wrong. But in part 3, they might say something like, should governments give citizens public transport for free? Or what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a private car versus buses, for example? These are not really about you. You can talk about you, but they're more abstract type questions that require a far more developed answer. So what band 5, 6, 6.5 students are doing is they're often giving very short answers. The examiner is not really interested in the answer to the question. This is not a knowledge test. This is not an IQ test. They are testing your ability to communicate. And part of communication is developing your answer. And we'll talk about how band 8 and 9 students do that in part 3 in a second. You'll often hear these students saying things like, I don't know anything about that topic, or that was a very, very difficult question. And they will often just not attempt an answer at all. Now, let me tell you a little secret about IELTS examiners on test day for the speaking test. If they think you're good, they will ask you more and more difficult questions because they have to separate out the band 7s from the band 8s from the band 9s. So they're going to ask you increasingly difficult questions to see if you can cope with it. If you don't answer the question, or you just do something like, I've seen students laugh because they're probably nervous. I've seen students just go, I don't know. You are basically telling the examiner, I don't deserve one of these higher bands. I am one of these lower band students. It's also very, very obvious to the examiner that you want the exam to be over. It is a very tiring day. It is a very stressful situation. The examiner is just throwing lots of difficult questions at you. You've been speaking in a foreign language for 15 minutes maybe at this stage. You just want it to be over. And what students will do is they will just give very short answers because your brain is screaming at you. Just give the examiner short answers and you can leave and this ordeal can be over. And it's also very obvious to the examiner that your range is limited. What do I mean by range? Well, the examiner will be thinking about your range of grammar and your range of vocabulary. This is an opportunity for them to ask you about lots of different topics and also asking you questions that require more complex grammar structures. Now, they're not doing this to be mean, it's just the best way to test someone's language level. So when they ask you about a more difficult topic, again, students won't be able to answer the question, or they will just refuse to answer the question. And then they'll ask you maybe a question that requires a more difficult tense or more difficult grammar structure to answer it effectively, and you're not able to do that. You're just using those basic structures. Let's have a listen to a few answers from our VIP students and think about whether they do these things or whether they do things differently. Is it easy to predict the weather in your country?
I suppose it is, yeah, because like I said earlier, some parts of India, the weather the temperature doesn't go over a certain degrees, but wherein some parts are really hot and humid throughout the year. So I think it's quite easy to predict. But when it comes to rain or monsoon season, it's a bit hard. Like a few months ago, in the north of India, it was raining heavily and the rain did not stop for, I'd say 2 weeks. So that was not predictable.
Why do you think some people fail in some careers?
I think one of the main drivers, I think, for people is money. And when you do anything solely because of money, then it will never work. And the reason people fail, I think, the biggest reason is because they have failed to align their identity with their work. Because we spend a third of our lives, in work. So a very big proportion of it, needs to feel fulfilled. And it can only be fulfilled if you understand, what you like authentically inside, and then, go into a career. But then the reality is that most people then, is jump in and figure it out, explore, and then we'll work it out, in hindsight. I guess that's what life's about.
So as you can probably hear, they attempt every question. Doesn't matter if they're thrown a difficult question. As you heard there, some of the questions were extremely difficult and it was obvious that the student was not an expert on that topic. But again, it's not an IQ test, it's not a knowledge test. The best thing that you can do, even if you know nothing about that topic, is attempt some kind of an answer, because you're explaining there to the examiner, okay, I don't know about this topic, but my English is good enough. I can communicate in English, and it is an English communication test. And there was lots of development. So they answered the question, but they also explained why they thought that or why other people thought that. They might have thrown in an example or a story related to their life. And what you often hear band 7, 8, and 9 students doing is showing the other side of the argument. They might say, well, some people think this, but other people think this, and I agree with this person or I agree with that person. So they're fully exploring that topic. They're not just saying, I think this. And they have no problem with range. Again, it is the intention of the examiner to test your language ability. The best way that they can do that is to throw these more complex topics that require a broader range of grammar, a broader range of vocabulary. And as you can hear, band 7, 8 and 9 students just naturally answer those questions. So now you know what to expect in part 1, part 2 and part 3. And that was just a general overview of the difference between lower level students and higher level students. Now let's look at some very specific common mistakes. Let's get into even more detail so that you can really understand what not to do and then improve your score to a band 7, 8 and 9. So here are some common mistakes. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about these very, very briefly. Then I'm going to get my glamorous assistant here to ask me a question. I haven't prepared any answers or anything like that. I want it to be as natural as possible. And I will pretend to be a student who is doing one of these common mistakes. In the comments, what I want you to tell me is, which of these am I doing? My favorite website is IELTS Advantage because it helps me with my IELTS scores. Okay, so that's the first one. What do you think would be the problem with that one? To thank you for making it this far in the video, I want to give you 10% off our VIP course. The IELTS VIP course is the most successful IELTS course in the world. That is a fact because we have more band 7, 8 and 9 success stories than any other IELTS course in the entire world. We do that by simplifying the whole IELTS process, supporting you with some of the best IELTS teachers in the world, and being with you every step of the way until you get the score that you need. All you have to do is just look down in the description, just click that, and you can sign up. If you have any questions about the VIP course, always feel free to get in touch with us. We answer 100% of the questions that we get. Hope that you become a VIP. If not, enjoy the rest of this free video. Justin asked me, what's my favorite website? And I said, my favorite website is IELTS Advantage because it helps me with my IELTS scores. Which of these things do you think is the problem? In the comments, let me know. Okay, so it's pretty obvious. It's too short. But why is that a problem? So, I mean, the grammar was fine, the vocabulary was fine, the fluency was fine, pronunciation was fine. Why is that a problem? Well, you're not really giving the examiner enough to go on if you give a really, really, really short answer to a question. And they might ask you follow-up questions like why, or can you, asking you to develop your answer a little bit more. That might put you off. It might be like, oh, am I doing something wrong? It'll cause extra stress. You want to be developing your answer a little bit more than that. Now for part 1, you don't have to develop it much more than that, but just giving a one-sentence answer wouldn't really be enough. You'd have to add a little bit more detail or an explanation or example or something like that just to develop it a little bit more. This is going to be more difficult than I thought. I thought this was going to be really easy, but trying to answer a question and pretend to be someone else is more difficult than I thought. All right, so give me another one. My favorite kind of weather is cold weather because I do not like to be cold. When I am cold, I feel bad and I shiver because it is very cold. I always like warm weather. Warm weather is nice. That's why I like the summertime. Okay, so in the comments, what do you think about that one? Was it a memorized answer, trying to impress the examiner, too long, too short, robotic delivery? What do you think? And do we chances robotic delivery? Yeah, so, I mean, this is not really a student's fault. It can be a couple of things. Number one, it can be because you're really stressed out. It is a very stressful exam. Obviously, you might have a lot of pressure in terms of it might cost you your job. It might lead to your family being, upset with you. You might have a visa waiting for you. It is a very, very high stakes test. So what happens is people just, kind of clam up and speak in a very, very robotic way. So that is a problem because you're not being as fluent as you could be. Also, if you are so stressed out that you are speaking in that way, then people tend to make, in my experience, more grammar and vocabulary mistakes because they're just not relaxed and speaking in a natural way. And also sometimes it can cause pronunciation issues for the same reason, because a lot of people, when they're speaking in that way, can speak in a very quiet way, like inside their mouth is how I always describe it, rather than projecting their voice, so it might make it a little bit difficult for the examiner. So there's lots and lots of problems you can have there. The other reason is a lot of people have been taught that the IELTS speaking test is a formal academic test, and you should speak in a formal academic way. It's not. It's a speaking test about how you would speak to a normal person in a normal situation. You're not going to speak in that overly formal, overly academic, robotic way, because that's not how you would speak to someone. Like, imagine if Justin and I were having a meeting and I said, like, how was your weekend? My weekend was good. He wouldn't really talk like that. So one of the key pieces of advice is just speak to the examiner in the same way that you would speak to a friend or a colleague or a classmate or a teacher, someone who you know, when you're not speaking in a really, really informal or formal way. Just in a normal way would be good. Okay. So you could say that I'm a real fashionista, and I wouldn't really dress down once in a blue moon, because I am a real fashionaholic. And fashion is my life. I would die for fashion. So when I'm in the mood, I go to the shopping center with my buddies and we buy the place out and we spend lots of money buying new clothes. Okay, so in the comments, what would you say is the problem there? Trying to impress, yeah. So that person is trying to impress the examiner, and what they're doing is they're just thinking of as many big words and idioms and fancy vocabulary as they can. They are not answering the question. They're not thinking about answering the question. They're approaching the test as if it is a vocabulary test. You can also try and impress the examiner with fancy grammar structures and things like that, but that person was principally thinking that the test wasn't a speaking test, it was a vocabulary test, and ignoring these things. All right, so when you're doing that, when you're focusing just on vocabulary, then you're not really focusing on being coherent and answering the question. So there's a relationship between these two, and you shouldn't worry about one more than the other. For example, if you are just focusing on grammar and being 100% accurate all the time, then your fluency tends to go down. All right, because you can't think of the perfect grammar every single sentence and hope to have really, really good fluency. Same with your vocabulary. If you're just focusing on vocabulary, then your fluency and your coherence tend to be affected. So there is a relationship between these two. Remember, it's a speaking test, and these are components of speaking. It's not just a pronunciation test or just a vocabulary test or just a grammar test or just a fluency test. So we talked about robotic delivery, we've talked about trying to impress the examiner, we've talked about being too short. Memorized answers, this is when obviously you memorize an answer, and this really tricks people or trips people up, because what you'll do is you'll memorize an answer for a common question, like tell me about your hometown, or describe your home, or one of these, like what is your job, what do you like to do in your free time. So they'll memorize that answer, and they'll give normally a very, 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 very long answer to a question, and I'm sure you've heard people do this. What that means is two things. Normally that will affect your coherence, because you're not really answering the question, because you'll ask someone, like a really good example was on Friday. I was working with a student, and I asked them, is your hometown a good place to grow up? And they told me about the architecture in their hometown, the transport system in their hometown, what else did they talk about? Education system, like telling me everything about their hometown. And I said to them, you just memorized an answer about your hometown, and you've given me that. So that obviously affected their coherence. What will also happen when you memorize an answer is the examiner will not think, oh my God, this person is amazing. The examiner will think, this person has memorized an answer, I'm pretty sure. Let's ask them a more difficult question, or a question on a different topic, or a follow-up question, and see how they cope with that. They'll ask you a different question, and what people who memorize answers normally do is like I don't know how to answer that because it's not because I haven't memorized an answer. So you're not fooling the examiner. They're trained in these things. They know what you're doing. They do it for a job. Could someone come into your job and try and trick you on something as silly as that? Hopefully not. So why do you think the examiners would fall for that? So you've just demonstrated that you can't speak English. You've demonstrated that you can memorize answers and give very, very long answers, but it's not a memorization test, all right? It's a speaking test. Let's look now at best practices. So I'm not going to give you the best practices. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Justin again to ask me some questions. I'm going to pretend that I am a student in the test, all right? And I'm going to answer them as best I can, demonstrate what I would do, and then we're going to come up as a group. In the comments, you're going to tell me some of the things that you think I did right. Remember, we're going to be basing everything on these: pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and coherence. So, and compare them also with the bad examples that we showed you here, okay? I would have to say, hands down, my favorite food is steak. So my wife cooks this for me every Friday. Normally I go for a workout and been lifting weights and running around, and I'm really, really hungry. So what I get is steak with chips, mushrooms, and onions. I just feel fantastic after I have that, and normally I have a little glass of red wine to go along with that as well. So, in the comments, tell me some of the things that you think I did well, and so how could we create some best practices in the comments. And that wasn't by the way, that wasn't a perfect answer, or an answer that you should copy, or an answer that, that's the only way to answer that. What's your favorite food? There are a million ways that you could answer that could get you a band 9. There are a million ways you could answer it to get you a band 5. The content wasn't important. What we're trying to get are these best practices, the things that you can learn from so that you can not copy that answer, but model it and learn from it. So a lot of you are saying that the answer was too long. What a lot of people learn from teachers and from online resources is that you should use a set number of sentences. That you should say 3 sentences, or you should say a set number of words, it should be 50 words long. That is not how you should think about it. You should think about the answer as, how can I answer this question naturally? If somebody asked me this question under normal circumstances, how would I answer it? Don't be thinking of number of sentences or anything like that. So a reason, so put explanation here. Good coherence, which I think what you mean is that I actually answered the question. I got to the point and I answered it fully. So developed, specific, okay. Rather than just give one answer, I'll give a few different answers and then you can judge. It's better to have a good sample. I love to watch US crime dramas. So there's a few of those that I've really become addicted to in the past, principally The Sopranos, The Wire, and Breaking Bad. So these are all very, very long series, and what I like about them is they're very episodic, so that you can just go from episode to episode to episode, and it's try and watch 1 or 2 a night, but sometimes it goes a little bit over that because they are very, very addictive. Again, from that, what would you say are the good things that you could use to model as well? Someone said the idea generation was good. I wouldn't really say idea generation for the speaking test so much, because remember, part 1 is about you. You can't get it wrong. So you're not thinking of an idea like making something up, really. What you're doing is just talking honestly about what you're that was my favorite food. Those were my favorite TV programs. And those are much, much easier to talk about than to make something up, to generate ideas. Sometimes you'll have to do that, but most of the time it's better just to speak naturally. A little pause for thinking. Yeah, so fluency does not mean speaking without pausing ever. You do need to think, all right? It is better to think for a couple of seconds and then give your answer than to immediately begin talking and then get lost and, you know, start, So I don't think it's, you know, mandatory for you to think at the beginning. I don't think that that's a best practice. But I think the point I'm trying to make is fluency does not mean that you never pause. It's a bad fluency is when you're pausing at an unnatural rate. Examples, grammar, I'm fluent, okay. So I'll give one more example and then we can talk about what I did. I use too many apps, I use hundreds of apps. Actually, recently what I've been trying to do is to make my phone a lot healthier to make me more productive. So what I mean by that is, in the past, I had a lot of social media apps, such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and that wasted a huge amount of time. So I deleted all of those from my phone, and now I use apps that can track my number of steps that I'm taking, my sleep, general exercise, calorie intake, things like that. So that will help me improve in the future rather than just waste time with apps that don't really improve my life at all. Again, what do you think about that one? So all of them have some common themes, all right? And that's what you want to do. You don't want to be copying the content or thinking, this is exactly what he said, or this is exactly what he did. Just think about the common themes amongst them. So definitely a lot of you talked about that they were natural. And yes, these are about me. They're questions that they're asking about me. When you are in the test, they're asking about you. So just ask them naturally or answer them naturally. And that is going to help your fluency, but I also think it helps your grammar, your pronunciation, and your vocabulary as well, because you're not thinking too much, because it's just easier to talk about yourself and to talk naturally. Also, I wasn't talking in a very robotic way. I wasn't trying to impress the examiner. I wasn't trying to insert lots of fancy words or anything like that. I was just speaking. Obviously, I'm a native English speaker, so that obviously helps. But if you need a 7 or above, you should be at a high level of English anyway. So just speaking in the same way as, imagine it's your first day of a new class and you're speaking to your classmates. How would you answer those questions? So a lot of you talked about the questions are developed. I gave some explanations, some examples. Again, going back to this, answering it naturally, I don't think it is a good idea to answer part 1 questions in a very formulaic way. What do I mean by that? So what a lot of people will do is suggest that you answer explanation and then example. Like, that is a very, very formulaic way of answering a question. Can that help you? Sure, it can help you, but do you answer questions in your native language in that way? Like, imagine you're speaking to your brother or your sister or your friend tonight and they asked you, what's your favorite TV program or what's your favorite food? You wouldn't think, like, my favorite food is steak. Explain, you know, and then, okay, it's my favorite food because blah, 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 blah. Example, last week, you wouldn't really do that. Does that mean that you should never use explanations and examples? No, but just have them as like tools in your toolkit. Think about it when you're developing things. I need to give the examiner enough information so that they can understand what I think about this, but don't think about it in a formulaic way, like a mathematical formula. You can add a little bit more detail, add an explanation, add an example, but not in a formulaic way. Hopefully that makes sense. Coherence, so that's related to, I developed the answer and I answered the specific question. When they ask you about your favorite food, tell them about your favorite food. If they ask you about apps, talk about apps. Answer the specific question that they're asking you. And also, again, developing it will help with your coherence. I'm a native English speaker, so I don't want to say my grammar was great or my vocabulary was great because I was, born speaking English. Obviously as well with fluency, so we not want to talk too much about those. I'm not going to pat myself on the back, by saying my English is great when I'm a native English speaker, of course. But what you will find there was I didn't try and focus on using really, really impressive grammar, impressive vocabulary. What I did was just answer the questions naturally. And by doing that, the grammar and the vocabulary and the fluency just flowed from that. If your grammar and your vocabulary and your fluency is good enough and you just answer the questions naturally, these will take care of themselves. But if you go into, okay, he asked me about my favorite food, what are some big adjectives I can think of, or what are some idioms I can use? Then your fluency is going to suffer because you're thinking way too much, and you're probably going to make lots of grammar and vocabulary mistakes because you'll be thinking about grammar and vocabulary that's beyond your level, that you're not able to use yet. So use the grammar and vocabulary that you are comfortable using to fluently develop your answer, and then everything kind of looks after itself. Pronunciation, we'll not talk about that because I'm a native English speaker, and hopefully my pronunciation is okay.
Next, I want to share something very, very special with you. So part 2 is probably the most challenging part of the speaking test for many, many students. What I've done is I have taken lots of real part 2 questions, and I'm going to show you how I personally would plan out the entire answer and then show you how I would answer it. This is going to fill you with confidence because you'll see even I don't really make things really complicated, and you don't need a very high level complex answer. You just keep things simple, give the examiners what they're looking for, and it can really improve your confidence on test day and your score. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
Before I show you each of the cue cards and reveal my Band 9 sample answer for each of them, I want to talk about how you can use this video to improve at home. So one thing you can do is you can just sit back, relax, and watch the video. That's fine if you want to do that. But if you really want to improve, what you can do is each time I show you the cue card, you could pause the video, spend 1 minute preparing your own answer, and then set 2 minutes on your phone, record yourself answering the actual question, and then listen to my answer, and you can compare. Now, if my answer is completely different from yours, that doesn't matter. What matters is you are actually practicing, you are thinking about these questions, and you are actually speaking. And listening back and thinking about your performance is really, really going to help. So if you want to do that, that is really going to help you improve your speaking. Or if you just want to sit back, that's fine as well. So let's have a look at these cue cards. Okay, so talk about a time when you received good news. So that'll be my wife's passport. It was before Easter. Give a background on why it was good news and what the news was about. So that will include that, and explain why the news was special, will allow us to travel, no need for visas, and then if we have time we can go into the holiday. So I received amazing news just before Easter this year. My wife got her new passport. Now, for most people that wouldn't be great news, but for my wife, because she's not from the UK, that was her first passport. So it was an amazing thing to happen. Just to give you some background on why it was so important and so special, if you're not from the UK and you get married to a citizen from the UK, it takes between 5 and 6 years before you can get an actual passport. You can live in the UK, but you're not allowed to get a passport. You have to apply multiple times, send them mountains of information, and spend thousands of pounds trying to get that done. And what that does is it creates a huge problem, because if you have what's called a spouse visa for the UK, and you don't have one of the premium passports that allows you to travel around the world, it means you're kind of stuck in the UK. So for about 5 or 6 years, we were living in the UK, but my family could only travel to my wife's home country. She couldn't travel to Europe, she couldn't travel to America without going through a very stressful process of applying for visas there. So getting this passport was amazing news because it means that we can go on holiday, we can travel anywhere pretty much in the world visa free, and it just opens up, literally opens up the whole world to my family. And to celebrate, I booked a holiday to Portugal. It was the first time my wife had ever been to Portugal, and we were able to just breeze through immigration with her British passport. Okay, so I'm gonna go snorkeling. Tell a story about Barbados. So the first time, and then the second time to, it was too wavy? No, not too wavy. It's too rough. Maybe try scuba. What activity it was, where you did it, when you did it, explain whether you liked it or not. Okay. Maybe say why you like it. Okay. So an activity that I took part in outdoors recently, well, a few months ago actually, was snorkeling. So I've never been snorkeling before, and in August 2020, we went on holiday in Barbados, and we had a house right on the beach, and I went swimming every day because the water was right there. And our next door neighbor, it was an American guy, every day he would go in snorkeling, and I didn't really think that snorkeling was available. And then on our last day of the holiday, he said, "Do you want to try my snorkel?" So I put the snorkel on, and I was kind of really surprised and kind of disappointed because there was this amazing coral reef right under the sea, a stone's throw away from my house. So, for 2 weeks I was swimming and could have been watching this amazing scene underneath the water. So we rebooked our holiday to Barbados. We went back again December last year, and I brought my snorkel with me. I went to the sports shop and purchased the best snorkel I could buy and brought it in my suitcase with me. And when we got there, we discovered that the sea was too rough, so I couldn't snorkel, and the sea was rough and choppy the whole time we were there. So not only could I not snorkel, I couldn't even swim. So I missed that opportunity again. In the future, I hope to snorkel maybe somewhere else that has more reliable snorkeling. But I'd also like to try scuba diving because I think weather doesn't really matter so much because you're underneath the water, and it's a far more immersive experience, but it does require a lot of training. So maybe I need to do my PADI license. So that was wait on a flight because the flight was cancelled. We had to decide. So what we did right away, decide Portugal or Spain or stay. Decided to stay. It was great because it was quiet. Felt very calm, but disappointed because no compensation. Okay. I hope that you're enjoying this video, but YouTube can be a little bit confusing and overwhelming. So what we've done is we've created a free IELTS course called IELTS Fundamentals. What IELTS Fundamentals does is it just boils everything down into the most important fundamental things that you need to learn. It's designed to help you remove all of the stress and just get the score that you need in the quickest possible time by just giving you the information that you need. And it covers everything. It's 100% free, and it has helped thousands of students get a band 7, 8 or 9. If you want to sign up for IELTS Fundamentals for free, click the link in the description. Thanks very much, and let's get back to the video. So recently I had to wait nearly 1 week for a flight. So we were flying back from the south of Portugal, the Algarve, from an airport called Faro. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Apologies to any Portuguese in the audience. But what happened was our flight was at 8 p.m. from Portugal back to Belfast. And at 10 to 8, so 10 minutes before the flight was about to take off, I got a text message saying that the flight was cancelled with no explanation at all. I think it was the French traffic controllers. So thanks very much for that. And what happened in the immediate aftermath was we just said, okay, no problem. We went to a hotel. And it was actually a bonus because we went to a little town in Portugal that we would never normally go to. And it was amazing because we got to see the real Portugal. They had a fish market and a vegetable market there, and right beside the water. So it was nice just to go and shop with the locals and have coffee with the locals. So it was actually a blessing in disguise. Later that day, we needed to decide either we had to get a taxi to Spain because there was no flights available that day from Portugal to Belfast, or to take a 4-hour taxi ride to Lisbon, the capital, or just wait for the next available flight, which was 5 days away. So we decided to do that because when we added up all the costs, it was actually cheaper just to stay an extra 5 days. And that was an amazing experience because we went back to the same resort that we stayed in. And because Easter had passed, it was basically just us in the resort. So we got, not just 5-star service, 6-star service. And it was really quiet and beautiful. And having our flight cancelled was an amazing experience. Okay, there's no one that I can think of that I really want to work with. So I'm just going to pick someone famous because that's going to be easy to talk about. So Elon Musk, how you know them, Tesla, Twitter, etc. What they do, so that's kind of the same thing. The thing I would like, so it's first principles, thinking, and then he makes money by solving problems. And you could learn a lot from him. Then what else could we talk about? Probably the negatives. He's controversial. Don't know why, but he is. I suppose if I had to choose one person to work with, it would be Elon Musk. Elon Musk is one of the most successful business people in the history of the world. He's one of the richest people in the world. So it's obvious why you would want to work with him, because you could learn a huge amount from him. He's famous because not only has he started one successful company, I think he has started more than 10 successful companies. He's famous for Tesla, which was the first company to successfully start an electric car company. SpaceX, he also bought Twitter, but he also set up PayPal. So he not only has been successful, he has been successful in many different domains. And the thing that I would really like to learn from him is how he makes money and makes a profit by trying to solve problems for the planet and for people. Because Tesla makes a lot of money, but it is also saving the environment. SpaceX makes a lot of money, but it could also save humanity. If there was a natural disaster and we all had to get off the planet, then it's probably the only way we can go is to move to the moon or move to Mars. So his rationale, his modus operandi seems to be find a huge problem, solve that problem, and get paid for it. And I would really, really like to do that. I try and do that in my own business. So the IELTS test is a huge problem for thousands of people all around the world. We try and make it simple and easier for them to get the scores that they need. But I think there's probably bigger problems that I could tackle now that I've solved that IELTS problem. This is actually quite a difficult one because I don't come from a rich family. So I suppose I'll just say that. The only time I can ever remember getting money from my family is communion money. Explain what that is. That's why I received it. It was stolen from me. So but it makes me very grateful because of why it was stolen in inverted commas. I don't come from a very wealthy family, so I've never been given a huge amount of money in my life. The only time I can remember being given a significant amount of money was for my first Holy Communion. So I'm Irish, I'm from a Catholic background, and if you grow up Catholic, when you're around 7, 8 years old, you do your first Holy Communion, and it's like a big milestone in a child's life. And normally, family members will give you some money. So I think at the time I was given like between 40 and 50 pounds. So in the late 80s, early 90s, can't remember exactly when that was, early 90s, that was a significant amount of money. But I actually reminded my mother the other day that she took that money from me. I said she stole it from me. And her response was, well, we didn't have any money, so I stole it from you to buy you food and to buy you clothes. So I did feel quite aggrieved at the time because a lot of my richer friends were going and buying toys and things like that. And it was the first time I'd ever had a significant amount of money, and then it was taken from me right away. But looking back now, it fills me with gratitude. I'm very grateful that it happened because it shows how much my mother struggled and how hard she worked for me in order to set me up in life. And recently my little boy did his first Holy Communion and he got a lot more than I got, and he wasted it on buying things in a computer game. And it was a good opportunity for us to teach him about money and teach him about not wasting money. Now he wants to buy more things in the computer game, but I told him that he has to work for it and he has to do some jobs around the house if he wants that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about copyright because that's a law that affects me directly every day. So I'm going to explain what copyright is. Basically protects IP. I follow it by being original. Protects from people I hate. Let's call a spade, and explain what should happen if you break that law. So a law that I like is copyright. Copyright protects content creators, people who create things. It protects their intellectual property from being copied without authorization. The reason why I like this law is because my job, principally, 80% of my time is spent making original content. So that could be a blog post, that could be a YouTube video, it could be an image, something like that. And how this law protects me is on a daily basis, definitely a weekly basis, somebody takes my original work and just copies it completely. And what we can do is we can then tell the platforms, or sometimes like YouTube tells us, hey, somebody has copied your work. And what that allows us to do is basically get that taken down, and then YouTube can either ban them from the platform, or what they do is they have a 3 strikes policy, I think, where if they do it 3 times, they're completely banned from the platform. I do like this law, but I think that it isn't enforced enough, and it isn't respected enough by other people. Recently we had, or not recently, throughout our whole career, we've had a lot of people not only copying our content, the words and the images and the video, but copying things now like our titles and our thumbnail images, which are all original, and they take a lot of creativity and brain power and time and work. And I absolutely hate the fact that somebody lazy and stupid, to be honest, can just come along and take that and steal it. And when we report people stealing our titles, people stealing our thumbnails, YouTube are less likely to take that down, because they don't consider that a copyright violation, when, if you follow the letter of the law, it actually is. Okay, so Portuguese, fish stew, perfect, because in a pot. Restaurant allowed us to take turns. Explain how you felt. Great, because it allowed us to have a good time with our children. An unusual meal I had recently was at a Portuguese restaurant, and for the first time my wife and I and my 2 little boys had Portuguese fish stew. I'll not try and pronounce the Portuguese version of it, but basically it comes in a big cast iron pot, and it has rice and prawns and other fish and clams and other shellfish in it. The reason why it was such an unusual experience was it was a restaurant that was completely outside, and it was set in a big garden on the ocean, on the Atlantic Ocean, and there were cliffs kind of going down to the ocean. And it was very special because if you have 2 young boys, they don't want to sit in a fancy restaurant. And this allowed our boys to kind of run around the gardens and go and have a look over the cliffs and all. Don't worry, it was safe. And it allowed myself and my wife to take turns playing with the boys or eating our meal. And because the stew was in a big cast iron pot, as I said, it didn't get cold. So I would eat some while my wife was looking after my boys, and then my wife would come back and she would eat some, and then I would go and play with my boys. And they didn't really eat it because they think that, you know, prawns and things like that are gross. But we really, really enjoyed it. I would definitely go back to that restaurant again, and I would definitely order that meal. One thing we did miss out on was as we were leaving, we discovered they had a fresh fish counter where the daily catch was brought in, and you could actually go and choose your fish. My wife loves seafood, and next time we'll get the fish stew, but we'll also pick a few other things. So we'll be hiking. I'll explain 3 places or 4 places. I normally do it alone because I like to listen to podcasts or to think. And then I'll talk about the physical side of it, and then talk more about the mental benefits. And then if I run out of time or run out of things to say, I'll talk about the weather, which is kind of a downside of it. Yeah, that should be enough. As you can probably tell from looking at me, I'm not the healthiest person in the world, but one thing I do enjoy, which is quite healthy, is hiking. I live in Northern Ireland, and I live in a part of Northern Ireland which is world renowned for its natural beauty. So right on our doorstep, we have beaches, we have 2 beautiful forest parks, we have a beautiful lake, and we've got like a medieval castle that you can walk around. So that means that there's a huge variety of places, and even within each of those places, like within the forest parks, there are different trails you can go down. So you're always discovering new places, and you never get bored. I like to do this on my own because I don't only do it for the physical health benefits, I do it for the mental health benefits. So I have quite a busy, stressful job, and being able to just get out in nature, we say it allows you to get your head showered here in Northern Ireland, which means, you know, just get out and bathe in nature, not literally bathe, but just surround yourself with nature. And it not only helps you with your cardiovascular health, it can help with stress and de-stressing as well. The only problem with hiking here in Northern Ireland is our weather is notoriously bad. So during the winter, it can snow, but most of the time it is actually just raining. And walking in the rain is not, and especially when it's cold and when it's windy, is not a great experience. But in the summertime, we often get spells of weather, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, where it is nice and dry, and that is an amazing time. I generally work a lot less during those times and try and get out every day onto one of the hiking trails. Istanbul, Champions League. Who you'll go with, because my son supports Man City. Why you want to go there? To see Man City. Explain why you want to go for a short period. Champions League. So there's not much there. So I'll talk about why it's not suitable for kids. And I'll talk about other parts of Turkey. So it's a lot of walking, historical stuff, cultural stuff. Yeah. So a place I'd love to go for a short period of time is Istanbul in Turkey. There's a very specific reason for that. Is in a couple of weeks, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, they have the Champions League final there. My little boy, Tom, who is 8 years old, is obsessed with Man City. So we watch all the Man City games here in the house, and he especially loves the Champions League. So if they make it to the final, I would love to take him to the Champions League final. I don't know if we'll be able to go, however, because tickets are quite hard to come by. But if we get the opportunity, I'd love to go. I wouldn't take him there for more than a couple of days. I know that Istanbul is an amazing place to visit, but I don't think it's suitable for children, or not for my kid anyway. The things that I would like to do in Istanbul, such as experience the wonderful food and the historical sites and the religious sites and the cultural things to do there, an 8-year-old is just not really interested in those things. So we would probably just fly in, stay the night before, go to the match, and then come back. I think the matches are held quite late there because of the temperature, so we probably would fly back the next day. I would like to take him back to Turkey, but probably not to Istanbul, for the reasons I just said. He doesn't really like big cities, but he does like seaside resorts, and there are places like Antalya in the south of Turkey, and I'd like to take him there for a lot longer, a week or two, so he could experience Turkey and all the wonderful things there that they have for kids. Okay, so there's an old man in the sea. I met him in the sea while I was swimming. How you met them? I met them in the sea, what they do. So he's lived there for more than 80 years. In the sea nearly every day. Told me about the history of the village. He was just so calm and serene. He's a product of his environment. And he'd also worked in tourism. So, fascinating man that I met recently, back in December, so a few months back. I was swimming in the Caribbean Sea on the west coast of Barbados, and there was an old man who was just lying back, relaxing in the sea, and he started talking to me, and I discovered that he lived in a house right on the beach in the village where I was staying. He was more than 80 years old, and I discovered that he had been in the sea nearly every day of his life. And for me, that location is one of the most beautiful places in the entire universe. And it was quite astounding to meet someone who was doing the thing that I wish that I could do, and he'd done that for his entire life. And what struck me about this man was he was so calm, so serene, and when I thought about it, he was kind of a product of his environment. So I often wondered after meeting him, if he grew up in a let's say a poverty-stricken part of the world, in a very rough inner city neighborhood, would he be that person? So it's kind of thinking about that nature versus nurture debate. And it was also fascinating to talk to him about the village in Barbados that he grew up in, because I think his grandmother, he said, owned most of the land around that village, and she was such a lovely woman, and she just gave plots of land to everybody who needed it. So the village kind of grew up around her, and he knew everybody in the village, and they were all very tight because she had just gifted that land to everybody. So fascinating guy.
So by now you're probably thinking, just give me some quick tips and tricks. Your test might be coming up very, very soon, and we're going to do that, but in a very special way. We're going to teach you all the tips and tricks you need by telling you the story of one of our most successful students, Priyanka. Priyanka failed the speaking test 4 times in a row, and we helped her improve from a band 6 to a band 8 in just 2 weeks by sharing the 4 most important tips that you need to understand in order to improve. So let's hear Priyanka's story.
Priyanka failed her speaking test 4 times in a row, and she was about to give up on her dream of moving to Canada forever. But after I gave her these 4 simple tips, she jumped from a band 6 to a band 8 in just 2 weeks. So the other day I got this email. Chris, my test is in 2 weeks and I'm going to fail again. I failed my speaking 4 times in a row and I don't know why. Help! So I replied, let's do a one-on-one speaking test. And she was right. She failed again. In fact, she got a band 6 in fluency, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. But I could tell that if she changed just 4 simple things, she was going to get a band 8 on her next test. And when I told her this, she said, do you know my test is in 2 weeks? Yes. Do you know that if I fail this time, I'll never be able to move to Canada? Yes. Don't worry. Every band 9 student that I've worked with used these 4 simple tips. The first thing we needed to work on was her poor fluency. There were more ums and ahs in every answer than an Elon Musk interview. And Priyanka had the exact same problem Elon does when he speaks publicly. You see, when anybody speaks, they make these audible pauses, these ums and ahs. This is totally normal, and we all do this when we're thinking of what to say next. Elon is thinking of very complex things like how to launch a rocket to Mars, so he has more pauses, ums and ahs, because he's thinking a lot about what to say next. And this is exactly the same reason why Priyanka's fluency was so bad. You see, your brain is just like a computer. If you're like me, you'll have hundreds of tabs open in your browser. And what happens when you have hundreds of tabs open? Your computer slows down. So you might have the latest MacBook Pro, but if you push it too hard, it slows down. Her fluency wasn't bad, she was just trying too hard. You see, she was taught by other teachers that to get a high score on the IELTS speaking test, you need to have impressive ideas. So I asked Priyanka, what happens when you're speaking in the test and you try and think of complex ideas? And she said, I freeze and my mind goes completely blank. So why try and think of complex ideas? The truth is that nowhere in the official IELTS marking criteria does it mention complexity of ideas. In fact, ideas are not marked at all. But just telling students this information doesn't really change their behavior and their performance on test day. So I decided to show Priyanka exactly what to do. So I asked her a simple IELTS speaking question, and her answer was a complete mess. The usual ums and ahs and long pauses. So I asked her the same question again, and I asked her just to change one simple thing. And this changed everything. She answered the question with band 9 fluency. And Priyanka was completely amazed. You mean simple ideas increase my score? Yes. If you're trying to use complex ideas in the speaking test, you're making your life 10 times more difficult for no gain at all. It's like trying to eat a bowl of soup with a Swiss Army knife instead of just using a simple spoon. But just because we fixed her fluency issues doesn't mean she's going to get a high score for grammar. So let's look at that next. So we did the same thing again. I asked her a simple speaking question. How has your hometown changed since you were a child? And her first answer was long, it was complex, it had multiple different tenses and multiple different grammar structures in there. Do you think an answer like this would get a high score? Well, her answer might be complex. It might have a very wide range of grammar, but it contained multiple grammar errors. So what I did was I asked her the exact same question and I gave her some advice and told her to change just one thing. And here is her answer. My hometown has changed dramatically since I was a child. It used to be a small village, but it has grown into a bustling city with new opportunities. Despite the fast pace, the sense of community has remained strong. Now, this example only has two of the most basic tenses in the English language. It is much, much simpler, but it contained 0 errors. And to get a band 7 or above on your IELTS speaking test, 50% or more of your sentences must have 0 errors. To put it simply, the more sentences you produce with no grammatical errors, the higher your score. So which answer do you think would get a higher score? The one that has a very wide range of grammar, but lots of mistakes, or the simpler one with 0 mistakes? But like many of you, Priyanka was still very worried, and she asked me, what about range of grammar? Aren't I being judged on both range and accuracy? Well, in the test, you know the way the examiner asks you a range of different questions. Well, they're doing that to test the range of your grammar. Just by answering each question naturally and appropriately, you'll naturally use a range of different grammar structures and tenses. All you have to do is just answer the question. So in less than 5 minutes, we had fixed 50% of Priyanka's problems, but she's still worried about her vocabulary and her pronunciation. She'd been told by all of her old teachers that she needed to use complex vocabulary and that her accent was a problem and this was going to lower her pronunciation score. So I said, listen, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is you've just fixed your grammar and your fluency issues in less than 5 minutes, and you're probably going to get a very high score. The bad news is you're going to have to completely change everything about your vocabulary. And her reaction was very predictable. Like nearly every student I tell this to, they say, but my old teacher told me that I need to make all of my vocabulary complex. And this is 100% true. Most teachers, especially on YouTube, teach you that complex words equal a higher score. But we teach students something completely different. Think of vocabulary as tools in a toolkit. Each tool helps you do a job. Each word you know helps you discuss different topics. This tool helps you talk about your hometown, and this tool helps you talk about where you'd like to live in the future. Band 8 and 9 students have enough words, enough tools, so that they can handle any question or any topic. You see, using fancy vocabulary is like buying a very expensive fancy tool when all you need is a hammer to hit in a nail. The truth is that the vast majority of students that we work with have enough vocabulary already to get the score that they need. But because they've been taught to use very high-level complex words, they make lots of mistakes, and this actually lowers their score. It's like a band 7 is a weight that they can easily lift already. But instead of just lifting that weight, they try and lift a weight way heavier that they're not capable of lifting, and they end up dropping it on their head. So did Priyanka just answer some questions and use simple vocabulary and live happily ever after and get the score that she needed? No. Like many students, she got very angry with me for criticizing her old teachers. She told me that this was going to lead to failure, and she ended the call. So a few days go past and I don't hear anything from Priyanka. Finally, I check my email. She's booked another one-on-one speaking test with me. But at this point, her test is in 24 hours the next day. She's not just worried, she's completely freaking out. So I asked her a simple question. You've failed 4 times before. Do you think doing the same thing that you did those 4 times is going to lead to success? You see, all these speaking tips and tricks that you'll find online are just ways of you trying to trick the examiner into thinking that you're good enough and that you deserve a higher score than you're really capable of. We have a saying here in Ireland, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. The truth is that you are good enough to get the score that you need. You just have to use the English level and the words and the grammar and the vocabulary that you already have and show the examiner your real, genuine English level. So finally, Priyanka said, let's do a practice test. Let's do it your way. Her ideas were simple but relevant, her grammar was appropriate and accurate, and her vocabulary was wide-ranging enough that she could talk about any topic I asked her about, and she was able to speak accurately and fluently. But this just left her pronunciation. If she couldn't fix her pronunciation issues, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it was. She would still fail to get the score that she needed. And Priyanka's big pronunciation problem was that she spoke too quickly. If you speak too quickly, it is really difficult for the examiner to understand every word that you're saying. And if the examiner doesn't understand every word, they give you a low score. But in that final one-on-one session, her pronunciation popped up from a band 6 to a band 8 without me giving her any advice at all. She changed one thing without me telling her what to do. You see, once she answered each question naturally and used the grammar and vocabulary she already knew how to use, she relaxed. This meant that she made fewer mistakes, was less nervous, and relaxed even more. The more relaxed she was, the better her pronunciation. By fixing everything and being able to speak to the examiner in the same way that she would speak to a friend or a colleague, she slowed everything down. I could understand 100% of what she was saying, and she instantly improved her pronunciation. And a result, on test day, she got an amazing band 8. She moved to Canada, she found a better job, she earned more money, and lived happily ever after. And she never had to think of the silly IELTS test ever again. In this video, I'll reveal the most common sentence patterns used by Band 7, 8 and 9 students. We've used AI to analyze thousands of Band 7, 8 and 9 performances so that you can learn from them and improve your score. We'll also be playing a little game throughout the video, and if you get enough points, you'll win a very special prize at the end. So let's start off with question 1. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1 of the speaking test? I'm a, my role entails, in my professional capacity, and I am responsible for. Final answer? And the correct answer is A, I'm a. So when asked, do you work or study, which is the most common question that you'll get in part 1 of the speaking test, the most common response from Band 7, 8 and 9 students is simply, I'm a teacher, worker, whatever you do. But isn't that a little bit too simple for a Band 7, 8 and 9 student? Well, let's continue and we'll explain later in the video. Question 2. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1 of the test? I originate from, I hail from, I'm from, I am a product of. Final answer? And the correct answer is, I'm from. So like question 1, all of the wrong answers are technically correct. The English is absolutely fine. But in general, students that try and use those more advanced options tend to get a lower score. I know that doesn't make any sense right now. Continue to watch the video and we'll explain how that makes sense and how to improve your score. Question 3. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1? I prefer, I like, I normally, I live in. Final answer? And the correct answer is, I like. But these are actually all very, very common sentence patterns in part 1 of the speaking test. We use I like and I prefer to discuss things that we like doing. We use I normally to talk about daily routines. And we use I live in to talk about the accommodation that we live in or maybe talk about where we're from. Again, you're probably extremely surprised that these high-level students use such simple language. It must get more complicated when they start talking in part 2 of the test. Let's move on to part 2 of the test to find out. Which of these sentence patterns is most used by Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 2 of the IELTS speaking test? We went to, we were going, they had gone, we had been going. So this is a tricky one. Would you like to phone a friend? We use things called narrative tenses to tell stories about past experiences. And looking at these 4 options, these are all narrative tenses. One is past simple, one is past continuous, one is past perfect, and one is past perfect continuous. Any of these could be used to tell a story about the past, but the most common tense among these is past simple. So I'm going to go for we went to. Final answer? Correct. So now that we know that it's very common to use narrative tenses in part 2, let's look at how to use them in question number 5. Which of these sentences is incorrect? I went to London for 3 years. I was watching TV when the phone rang. He realized he left his passport at home. I'd been walking for hours before we found a restaurant. Final answer? And the correct answer is I went to London for 3 years. This is very, very important because it shows a crucial point about part 2 of the speaking test. It is not about which sentences you use or the range of different tenses that you use. It is about choosing a sentence that is appropriate and accurate. So in part 2, you'll be given a range of different bullet points. And the last bullet point, the most common one, the most popular one, will look like this, and explain how you felt about that thing. So let's move on to question 6, all about how you feel. Which of these sentence patterns would get the highest score? I felt sad. I was over the moon. I have a feeling of overwhelming joy. Words cannot describe the depths of my feelings. So that's a tricky one. Do you want to ask the audience? Audience, please pick the correct answer. And if you want to play along at home, in the comments, write A, B, C, or D. So let's look at the results. 49% think that it's D, 19% C, 17% A, and 15% think it's B. So 49% of you are wrong. It's wrong for 2 reasons. One, you didn't actually answer the question. That's not actually saying how you feel about anything. And examiners are trained to spot memorized answers. This sounds like a memorized answer, so you would actually get a lower score rather than a higher score. 19% of you are wrong because this is simply the wrong verb tense. Remember, it's not just whether the sentence is appropriate, but it also has to be accurate. 15% of you are wrong because this is simply inaccurate. It is wrong to say, I was over a moon. It is, I was over the moon. If you say to the examiner, I was over a moon, again, you are lowering your score. You're not increasing your score because you used some magic idiom. And well done to the 17% of you playing at home who got it correct. It answers the question and it is grammatically accurate. It is better than all of the others, therefore. So let's move on to the final round where we're going to look at part 3 of the speaking test. Part 3 is the most challenging, it is the most difficult, it has the most difficult questions and requires the most complex answers of the whole test. So question 7, what was the most common sentence pattern for band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 3 of the speaking test? I totally agree, not necessarily, it's possible that, in my opinion. So all of these are very, very common, but let's look at what they do. So I totally agree. We use that functional language to do the job of agreeing with someone. Not necessarily. Again, the function of that sentence pattern is to disagree with someone. It's possible that, the function of that is slightly different. It's possible that is to consider someone else's opinion. And in my opinion, you are expressing your opinion. And band 7, 8 and 9 students use this type of language, this functional language all the time because it helps them do things. They're not thinking about the most advanced pattern to use or the most high-level structure to use. They're thinking, what do I want to say? And what sentence pattern helps me do that? In other words, they're just solely focused on clearly answering the question. And the most common one is, in my opinion, because you will be giving your opinion a lot. But you're not done there. You can't just give lots and lots of opinions and get a high score. You must back it up with explaining your point of view. Question 8. Which of these is the most common way band 7, 8 and 9 students explain things? Like, in other words, that is to say that, because. Now, all of these are actually fine to use. All of them are correct. All of them can be used to explain why you believe something is true or why you have that opinion. But the most common way is because. Too simple? Well, no, because is the most common way native English speakers use. That's the most common sentence pattern that they use to explain things. Would a native English speaker get a low score because they use everyday normal English like because? So will you get a band 9? We're down to the final question, question 9. So you've stated your opinion, you've explained that opinion, but you need to go even further. And there are a few options open for you to help you expand your part 3 answers even more. Question 9. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common way for band 7, 8 and 9 students to expand their answer even further in part 3? On other hand, for example, to sum up, in nutshell, you're probably going to need a 50-50 for that one. Do you want to take a 50-50? Computer, please take away 2 wrong answers. So they've got rid of to sum up. Why is to sum up wrong? Well, again, think back to what we talked about functional language. To sum up is to summarize something. It is actually quite rare for high-level students to summarize what they're saying in part 3. So to sum up isn't technically wrong, it is just quite rare for a student to do that. In nutshell, again, we would use that to summarize something. We don't normally summarize things, as we just said, but in nutshell is wrong because it is inaccurate. It is not in nutshell, it's in a nutshell. So that leaves us with one wrong answer and one correct answer. Will you get them all right? On other hand, is good. Showing the other side of the argument is one of the best ways that you can expand your answer even further in part 3. So you talk about one side of the argument and then you talk about the other side of the argument, if you can think of it. So it's good, but it's not right, because it's not on other hand, it is on the other hand. Again, this is why a lot of students mess up, because they go and memorize a bunch of sentence patterns before the test, and that's why you clicked on the video, isn't it? And they use them incorrectly. So the correct answer is, for example, which is just a nice, simple way of giving an example. So if you use the sentences, the sentence patterns in this video, are you guaranteed to get a band 9? Absolutely not. The reason why you clicked on this video is because you want to memorize things. Many of you have been brought up in education systems where you have been taught that memorization is a skill. Unfortunately, IELTS is not a memorization test. It is an English communication test. Memorization is the opposite of clear communication. The key for the speaking test is to understand what type of questions might come up, and then have appropriate and accurate, simple, correct ways of dealing with all the most common questions. That is why Band 7, 8, and 9 students use simple language.
Most people think that the secret to IELTS speaking success is learning how to do a few things really well. But after helping thousands of students get a Band 9 in IELTS speaking, I can tell you the opposite is actually true. The real secret is Band 9 students avoid traps set for them by IELTS speaking examiners. And if you fall for them, you will fail.
This video will show you what those traps are, how to spot them, and how to avoid them so that you can massively increase your score. And at the end of the video, I'm going to reveal the biggest IELTS speaking secret that's contained in one of my favorite movies. Understanding this secret has done more to help my students get a Band 9 than anything else. And you can learn it instantly. The first trick they play is really sneaky, and it's the same trick my dad used to play when he worked here as a chef. Young chefs would come into his kitchen and ask him for a job. Sure, my dad would say, come back tomorrow, cook me something. If I like it, you can have a job. And just before they left, he'd say, is there anything you do not like to cook? And when they arrived the next day for the cooking demonstration, he'd ask them to cook the thing they hated. So what has my sneaky father got to do with IELTS speaking? If you look online for topics that will definitely come up on test day, you'll find these 3 topics. But if you look at the official Cambridge questions, you'll find very unusual topics that you weren't expecting. You see, when IELTS examiners ask about your home or your work or your hometown, they often get answers like this. I am over the moon that you asked me about my hometown. It is only once in a blue moon that I get to talk about a topic that is so close to my heart. There are a plethora of reasons why one would enjoy my hometown. Let's talk first about the 18th century architecture. But if the examiner was to ask them about a topic they weren't expecting, such as wigs, the examiner might hear an answer like this. I don't know anything about wigs. I've never worn a wig in my entire life. And things are going to get much worse for this student because the examiners are trained to spot memorized answers. And what they will do if they think that you are giving memorized answers, for example, about your hometown, they will ask you more and more difficult questions on unusual topics. And here's the scary part. The examiner has your memorized answer and your answer to the questions you weren't expecting. They will not base their score on this answer. They will base their score
on this answer alone. Because as my father used to say, a chef is only as good as their worst dish, not their best dish. Your memorized answers are not your real level. Your real speaking level is dealing with questions you were not expecting. So if you do get an unusual question on test day, answer it like this. No, I've never worn a wig. I think that people who wear wigs sound and look ridiculous. I think they really just do it for attention or to be funny, which isn't funny at all, to be honest. Now, if you thought the examiners were sneaky in part 1, you're really going to hate them after I reveal their sneaky trap in part 3 of the test. Now, before I tell you what it is, let me tell you why they do it. Because once you understand the why, you'll be able to spot it immediately and deal with it much more easily. So when I was a kid in primary school, I really struggled academically. I couldn't even write my own name properly. I couldn't understand most of the lessons and I wasn't allowed to sit with the other kids. But despite all this, I was able to eventually graduate from one of the best law schools in the world. You see, when I did a test, I got all the easy questions wrong, but the few really difficult questions at the end of the test that no other students could get correct, I would always get those correct. And this is exactly what the examiners are trained to do in part 3 of the speaking test. If they believe that you are at one of the lower bands, let's say a band 4 or a band 5, they will ask you quite easy questions like these ones. But if they think that you deserve one of the higher bands, a band 7, 8, or even 9, they will ask you more and more difficult questions. Notice how in the book here, the questions get more and more difficult. But the key here is how you react to these more difficult questions. These questions will come at the very end of the speaking test when you are stressed, you are tired, and you just want the test to end. And when the examiner asks these questions, often students will give answers like, yes, I don't know. The thing you have to remember with these questions is the examiner is testing you. They are testing, are you capable of answering these band 7, 8, and 9 questions? Because they have to separate out the band 7s from the band 8s from the band 9s. One of the ways they're trained to do that is ask these really, really difficult questions and then see how you react to them. So what if you know nothing about the topic or you just find that question really, really challenging? Are you going to automatically get a low score? No, let me show you how to cope with those questions. So if I was doing the test and I got this question and I know nothing about this topic, I am a complete idiot when it comes to this topic, I could say something like this. To be honest, I don't know anything about this topic. I'm not from India and I don't know much about cooking, but if I had to give an answer, it's very difficult to predict the future. But what I would say is maybe AI will change how the restaurants take orders and how they deliver the food to their customers. But that's just a complete guess. Now, is that the best answer in the world? No, but it is much better than, and by attempting an answer and telling the examiner what I think about that topic, even though I know nothing about it, I have indicated to the examiner that I am good enough to deal with those questions, and they might then steer the conversation to a topic that I'm more comfortable with, and then I can really show them how good I am. Now, the last trap is the sneakiest of them all, and it's got to do with how they test your vocabulary. There are thousands of words in the English language, and the examiners only have between 10 and 15 minutes to test your ability to use English vocabulary. So they came up with a genius way of testing it in around 10 minutes. See, some words we use to talk about this topic, some words this topic, and some words this topic. But if we try to use these words to talk about this topic, it doesn't work. These are called topic-specific words, and we can use them to talk about different topics. Knowing this information is crucial for 2 reasons. First, the examiners are trained to ask you a range of different topics on test day, so that you can't just memorize a list of band 9 words and put them into every answer and cheat the test in that way. Secondly, the examiners are more impressed with a simple, topic-specific word than a more complex word that doesn't really help you answer the question. This is why so many students fail the test when they were expecting to get a really high score, because they memorized lists of band 9 words. And this is why so many of our VIP students get a band 7, 8 and 9, not by memorizing lists of high-level band 9 words, but using the simple topic-specific words they already know.
It's actually impossible. Whoa. It's actually possible to avoid 100% of the traps that might come up in the speaking test. Not just the speaking test, but all areas of the IELTS test.
Every part of the IELTS test, reading, listening, writing, has traps contained within it. But there is one way that you can spot all of them and avoid all of them and massively increase your score. In the movie Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio plays a criminal that is being chased by FBI man Tom Hanks. Leo's character plays a criminal who pretends to be an airline pilot and a doctor and a lawyer. He also steals money by making fake checks and stealing credit cards. The crucial scene in this movie comes when Tom Hanks asks Leo, how did he fake passing the bar exam? The bar exam is an exam all lawyers have to take before they can become a lawyer. It is one of the most difficult tests in the entire world. And Tom Hanks can't figure out how a criminal, how a con man would be able to fake passing this test. And here's how he did it.
I didn't cheat. I studied for 2 weeks and I passed.
You see, he didn't need to fake becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an airline pilot. He didn't need to steal money to become rich. He was already talented and smart and intelligent enough to do all of these things without cheating, without stealing. He just needed to stop cheating. All of the IELTS traps are used to catch cheaters. Like Leo's character, most IELTS students don't cheat because they are bad people. They cheat because they lack confidence, they are scared that they're going to fail, and then they get desperate and resort to listening to these tricks and cheats and hacks. And the most fascinating thing is this movie is a true story. He now actually works for the FBI, and credit card companies have paid him millions of dollars to help prevent future criminals taking advantage of the system. If you believe that you're good enough and you don't cheat, the examiner is going to give you your real score on test day. And you'll be rewarded with a new life in a new country, getting paid way more than you currently are. You are more than capable of doing that. You just have to show them.
Made it across, didn't die. I'm going to give
Right, everyone. Thank you. I think that's late enough for you. I'll share the link again now in the chat so that you can watch the rest of that video tomorrow or thanks for joining. Last session is tomorrow. And we'll do a wrap tomorrow. All right, thank you very much.